With this crown, I declare you our sovereign. All hail the king! I, Esdras, saw upon the Mount Zion a great people, whom I could not number, and they all praised the Lord Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, with songs. And in the midst of them, there was a young man of a high stature, taller than all the rest, and upon every one of their heads he set crowns, and was more exalted, which I marveled at greatly. Receive this crown as a blessing from the Most High. May your reign be just and prosperous. So I asked the angel, and said, Sir, what are these? He answered and said unto me, These be they that have put off the mortal clothing, and put on the immortal, and have confessed the name of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. With this crown, I bestow upon you the legacy of our people. Rule wisely. Now are they crowned, and receive palms. Then said I unto the angel, What young person is it that crowneth them, and giveth them palms in their hands? So he answered and said unto me, It is the Son of Yahweh, whom they have confessed in the world. Then began I greatly to commend them that stood so stiffly for the name of the Lord. With this crown, I charge you to lead our people with wisdom and strength. All hail the new king. Hail! Then the angel said unto me, Go thy way, and tell my people what manner of things, and how great wonders of the Lord thy God thou hast seen. I now crown you king. All hail the new king. Long live the king!
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Kakadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples for his younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful elect out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful elect, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Al Shah. And what I want to get into, all right, with this live stream, dealing with some history that's good to know, as we see, all right, prophecy playing out, what I like to do, when certain things, come to the forefront with prophecy is to go back and see, the timeline, the storyline that led up to the moment that we in now, because one thing about history, you're able to study patterns and you begin to recognize, patterns, okay, which, gives us understanding, of things that we're seeing now. It's a beautiful thing about history. It gives you a pattern to study, based on the current events that we see now, so as we see particular things playing out, which the Lord has prophecy, heavy, at work, okay, and we're able to, commentate on these things in the spirit because these things was written, before time. The Lord set these things in motion. He set these things, all right, for an appointed time. And now that we're seeing these things in motion, okay, it lines up, perfectly with scriptures. Okay. So I want to go into a little history, just dealing with Iran, in their relationship with the West, and it makes a lot of sense, when we're looking at what we're seeing happening now. Okay. Now, when you go to the book of Micah, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand." Okay. So these devils, they've, had the luxury, okay, in their comfort, you see, to go into these why because the wickedness that we see play out in the earth, okay, is a result of these wicked counsel that these devils, beginning with these elite banking families, okay, certain leaders, certain, politicians that's in the inner circle, okay, and they let them know, all right, what's the plan, what's the play for this and that, okay, and they're able to execute it because they have people, in high position throughout all, throughout all governments, throughout all industries, throughout all education, throughout all science and medicine, and so they're able to, carry out their wicked plans because, okay, they control, okay, the higher ups in every industry of the world, okay, in every sector of society, they control the higher ups, okay, so they're able to have these wicked counsels and then go carry these things out, whether it's a war, okay, whether it's poisoning the food, whether it's poisoning the air, whether it's teaching this lie and this falsehood, whether it's, dealing with this religion, whether it's that, it's in the power of their hand. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked, okay, and he goes about, how he runs the earth in a very wicked, all right, and tyrannical way, Now, when you keep reading, it says, "And they covet fields, and they take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage," man. All right. And the heritage goes into your inheritance, man, what's passed down to you from your fathers. Okay. And the scripture said you're not supposed to remove, a landmark. Okay. Because you can rule over the people. All right. And the people still have, substance so they can live off of, so they can prosper as a people, and they can still be subjugated to you and prosper as a people. But see, Esau plays what you call a zero-sum game. Okay, he wants it all and you with nothing. Okay, and he rations to you to how he see fits, which that's wicked, man. Okay, it's wicked and all and unbalanced how this man rules the planet Earth. Okay, and then he just making the case of why he, all right, is an unfit ruler, and why the Lord didn't bless this nigga with the birthright, man. Okay, with an eternal kingdom, man, because this nigga can't handle the temporal kingdom, man. Okay, you see, if this was an audition, okay, for the birthright, man, this nigga did horrible, man. Okay, but they covered field, which is the earth. Okay, and they take them by violence, the sword, which it was he was given the sword to sustain himself, man. But what does this devil do? He goes overboard with everything, man. Okay, he does too much with everything. You see, and we're gonna get into a video that's an example of that, man. All right, but it's gonna end bad for Esau. All this wickedness, all this robbery, all this, just this perpetual war, and just being this bully, just being this, unreasonable tyrant. Okay, there's some judgment for that, man. And especially what he did to Israel, because he took it too far with Israel, man. And that's, has provoked the Lord, all right, to anger. You see, Micah 2:3 said, "Therefore, thus said the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Al-Shah, behold, against this family do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil." Okay, so the Lord has a bad time prepared for this devil. Okay, Esau finna come into bad times. All right, the Lord's going to use this man, all right, for judgment on the left-hand side. Okay, he's going to allow Esau to spaz out. Okay, just go crazy with the sword, especially over here in America, man. Okay, so he's going to allow this devil to spaz out for the sake of judgment, and then it's going to be evil times for him. Okay, the Lord going to bring about evil times for this devil, man. Okay, this third world war is going to take America off the map. Okay, you see, it's going to cause these elites, to be in these bunkers. Okay, and then the Lord going to get their ass out those bunkers. They go into captivity, man. Okay, that's why I said, which you shall not remove your necks. Okay, so these devils are set for judgment. They're on the path of judgment, man. Okay, and they just been, on a rampage ever since the Renaissance until now. Okay, but he's not going to go away haughtily, which is proudly, from the judgment that the Lord got for him, man. Okay, let's go here real quick to the book of Habakkuk. Okay, let's go to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1. Okay, let's go here to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, in verse 6. It says, "For lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans." Okay, back in this time, speaking of the Babylonians, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Okay, but in this time, who's speaking of the daughter of Babylon? Okay, the Chaldeans, that was the Magi. Okay, the astrologers, the left hand, priesthood. Okay, that was amongst the ruling class. Okay, of the Neo-Babylonians, man, the Chaldeans. Okay, they were the elites of that time. Okay, so the elites, okay, have been raised up in power, and America has been their throne. Because they operated, they operate behind the scenes of these different European governments, these different Edomite governments. The British, the French, the Spanish. All right, the main, superpowers. Starting back from the Renaissance until now, with America being their last superpower. Okay, America is their last superpower, man. And this devil, these elites, okay, have used America, all right, to weaken the earth, to mold the earth into this new world order. You see, it says, "For lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth, all right, of the land, to oppose, all right, to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs." Okay, and then no one did this like America, man. The American empire, has its hand in everything in the earth, man. It has influence on every government in the world. Okay, some more than others, some way more than others, but the American, all right, reach, all right, is global. All right, they call it hegemony. Okay, or hegemony, however you want to pronounce it, goes into an empire's influence, okay, in foreign lands. Okay, and the American hegemony has dominated the earth, man. Okay, through the backing of the elites. You see, the Americans has been nothing but a corporation of the elites, man. Okay, that's why the corporation doesn't work in the benefit on behalf of the American people. Okay, they let you Americans get a little taste, to get your trust, to to pamper you, and get you distracted and addicted to convenience. But even that was a trap. Okay, when you keep reading, said Habakkuk said, "They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves." Yeah, their righteousness, and that, because they have this saying, "Might is right." So their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Okay, Trump said that recently. Said, "Look, I don't need international law. I got my own morals. That's my law. I don't need international law. Okay, I'm good on that. Y'all need international law. Okay." But this is how these devils feel, especially the higher up you get, and their mind might makes right. If they can pull it off and you can't stop them, then they're justified. Okay, if they can pull it off and you can't stop them, then they're justified. Might makes right. Okay, and this is how these devils run the earth. Okay, it says their horses also are swifter than leopards, their military, and more fierce than the eating of wolves, and their horsemen shall spread themselves. Okay, and no one is spread more thin than the American military. Okay, several hundred bases throughout the earth, man. No one is more spread in every hemisphere than the American military, man. Okay, it says, "And their horsemen shall come from far; they shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat." Okay, flies the eagle. You see, they're hasted to eat, man. And they're quick to go to war. Because they're hasty. When it comes to spoil. They're hasty to go to war, bully a nation out their resources, set up, all right, these Western corporations, okay, to where they enrich, these the oligarchs, okay, these few oligarch families, okay, enslave the local population and impoverish, okay, the local people. A few government officials are in on the take. They get a little kickback, and make sure their laws are set up in their land for Esau to come in and set up shop, okay, and exploit, all right, the local labor, okay, turn it into slave labor. You see, and get the profit out of the resources. It might build a highway, a mall, and the movie theater, and you see, a couple restaurants, okay, as if they're just modernizing. The great white man has came to modernize the the place, man. They run that same game all throughout the earth, man. Okay, so let's keep reading. It says, they shall come all for violence, their faces shall sop up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And this devil, he's been able to enslave the majority of the earth, man. You have a few nations, that have, fought back, kept this nigga at bay to a degree, like in North Korea, okay, and even like we finna go into with Iran, all right. But this devil, as long as he's in power, he'll never stop, okay? He'll never stop, man. You see? So let's keep going. And it says, and they shall scoff at kings, and princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it, man. And this is speaking about like an ancient siege, okay? In the ancient world, would heap up dust, they would build those siege ramps, on the walls of a city, to take the city. Well, they do this economically now, man. They make these nations, all right, they put these sanctions on these nations, okay, and these nations will buckle, okay, to the demands, even if they don't go directly militarily from the jump, they weaken a lot of these nations with sanctions, man. Okay, which impoverish, all right, these nations, man, in this petrodollar system. Okay, so they've been able to siege these nations through sanctions, and a lot of these nations are forced to take these terrible deals with the West, man. They're weakening with those sieges, then they'll come in, and just effortlessly take over militarily, man, and set up a puppet regime, all right, that favors the West. Okay, set up shop and on to the next, man. So this has been the devil's MO. Okay, and they have their hand, in every government in the earth to some degree. Okay, and you have a little resistance, I say with Iran is we're going to get into, okay, because Iran plays a particular part in prophecy. Okay, they play a particular role in prophecy, which is going to lead, to this great war. Okay, so let's go to the clip. Like I say, it's a pretty good clip, man. He go in with the history. Let's go here. Yep. So it begins with with Britain and Iran. Okay, because he's gonna go into it, and we'll add, as needed, but he's gonna go into it. So let's play this.
Single most valuable piece of real estate in the British Empire. It was not a gold mine in South Africa. It was not a tea plantation in India. It was a sprawling tangle of steel pipes, cooling towers, and smokestacks known as the Abadan refinery. In 1951, this facility was the largest oil refinery on the planet. It covered a square mile of desert. It processed 25 million tons of crude oil a year. And every single drop of that oil, every penny of profit generated by the black blood pumping through those pipes belonged to a company called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. To the British government, sitting 4,000 miles away in the grey drizzle of London Abadan was not just an industrial asset. It was a life support machine. The British Empire had emerged from the Second World War victorious but destitute. The national treasury was empty, drained to pay for the fight against Hitler. The country was drowning in debt owed to the United States. The British people were living on rations, eating powdered eggs, and wearing utility clothing. The only thing keeping the British economy from total collapse was the hard currency earned by its overseas assets. And by far the biggest earner was Iranian oil. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which we know today as BP, was essentially a state within a state. It generated millions of pounds in revenue that flowed directly into the British exchequer. It fueled the Royal Navy. It provided the energy for the factories of the Midlands. It was the financial lung that allowed a shrinking empire to keep breathing. But there was a problem. This massive engine of wealth was located in a country that was waking up. Iran was an ancient civilization with a proud history, but for the first half of the 20th century, it had been treated as little more than a colonial resource extraction zone. The British ran the oil industry in Iran with a level of arrogance that is difficult to comprehend today. In Abadan, the British administrators lived in a segregated enclave that looked like an English suburb. They had cricket pitches, manicured lawns, swimming pools, and air-conditioned bungalows. They imported their food from London. They drank gin and tonics on verandas, while just outside the fence, the Iranian workers lived in shanty towns made of flattened oil drums. There was no running water. There was no electricity. The heat was unbearable, often reaching 120 degrees. The workers were paid pennies. They had no rights. They were treated as coolies in their own country. The injustice was mathematical. In 1950 alone, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company made a profit of 170 million pounds. They paid the Iranian government less than 16 million pounds in royalties. The British government collected more in taxes from the company than the Iranian government received for its own natural resource. For decades, the Iranians had simmered with resentment. But in 1951, that resentment boiled over into a revolution. And the face of that revolution was a man named Mohammad Mossadegh.
So, just to sum it up, all right, the British government owned, all right, the oil in Iran. Okay, so the British government, all right, made 170 pounds a year, and they would only kick back the Iranian, all right, government 16. You had Edomites, living in suburbs around their oil field. Okay, they're living these in these rich, they live in this rich, luxurious lifestyle, while the Iranian people were the ones working the oil field. Okay, scrapulating the oil. Okay, while the British, made, all right, the wealth. Okay, while the British got wealthy, man. Okay, so what happened is the locals, they got riled up. You see, and you had this guy Mohammad Mossadegh, all right, who became a leader amongst the Iranian people. Okay, and remember, this is going back to the 1950s, post-World War II. Okay, when Britain, all right, was losing its superpower status. Okay, and the baton was handed to America. Okay, so let's play this.
Mossadegh was an aristocrat, a lawyer, and a passionate nationalist. He was an elderly man, frail, often prone to fainting spells and fits of weeping in public. He wore pajamas to diplomatic meetings. The British diplomats dismissed him as a hysteric, a clown, a madman. They made fun of his long nose and his emotional speeches, but they underestimated him completely. Mossadegh was a brilliant politician who understood the one thing the British had forgotten: the power of dignity. Mossadegh argued a simple point: the oil under the Iranian soil belonged to the Iranian people. It was a gift from God to the nation, not a dividend for shareholders in London. He demanded that the books be opened. He demanded a fair split of the profits, 50-50, similar to the deal American oil companies had recently signed with Saudi Arabia. The British refused. The chairman of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, Sir William Fraser, was a man of the old imperial school. He believed that the Iranians were incapable of running the industry. He believed that any concession would be a sign of weakness. He treated the Iranian government like a rebellious employee. He refused to negotiate. He refused to open the books. He believed that if he just held firm, the Iranians would back down because they needed the British technicians to run the complex machinery of the refinery. Fraser's arrogance was the match that lit the fuse. On March 15th, 1951, the Iranian...
And these devils think they're the only one that's capable of doing any goddamn thing, man. Or the Edomite superior to everybody else. And Esau believed his own wine. Like everybody else is inferior. and he's just so superior and wise, and everybody just depended on his ass, man. You know, they goddamn Edomite superiority, man. That scientific racism, man. Now it's the worst with Esau and Jake, but he look at all these other nations like that as inferior, man. You know, and then he's just so much wiser, man. You know, and then and they can't survive without his science and his technician, man. Get your ass out of here, man. You know, but this nigga, man.
In Parliament, the Majlis voted unanimously to nationalize the oil industry. A few weeks later, they elected Mohammed Mossadegh as the new prime minister. The news hit London like a seismic shock. It was the unthinkable. A third world nation had simply seized the greatest asset of the British crown. It wasn't just a theft, it was a humiliation. It was a signal to the world that the British lion was toothless. In the cabinet room at number 10 Downing Street, the Labour government of Clement Attlee was paralyzed. They were terrified. They knew what this meant financially. If they lost the oil revenue, the British pound would collapse. The standard of living in Britain, which was already austere, would crash to third world levels. They would not be able to afford to import food. The British military chiefs drew up plans for an invasion. They called it Operation Buccaneer. They planned to seize the island of Abadan by force, using paratroopers and Marines to secure the refinery and the oil fields. They wanted to do what empires had always done when the natives got restless, send in the gunboats. But the Treasury officials looked at the plan and shook their heads. They told the Prime Minister the brutal truth. We cannot afford a war. An invasion would cost millions. It would require occupying a country the size of Western Europe. It would turn the entire Muslim world against Britain. And most importantly, the United States wouldn't support it. President Harry Truman was bogged down in the Korean War. He didn't want another conflict in the Middle East. He warned the British that if they invaded Iran, he would not back them up. Without American money, Britain couldn't fight. The gunboats stayed in the harbor.
Because after World War II, the money, shifted to America. Okay, the elite settled shop. They threw all the money and their interest behind America. Okay, because America was unscathed, in this Second World War. Okay, British were war torn. All right, the economy was through. Okay, but America thrived. Okay, because the elites had invested, embedded, and gambled on America winning the war. Okay, and they won the bet, and they settled shop in America, and that's why America became, all right, the leader, okay, of the world order post World War II. Okay, and they had abandoned, okay, Britain for the most part. Okay, and the Americans, they was tied in the Korean War. Okay, because all these devils, all they do is go to war. You see, America, like, we fighting this war, like we can't, we can't do that right now. Okay, so the British, and they're, stuck trying to figure out, okay, how do we, get that Iranian oil back, because they had, the Iranian people, they chose a leader, all right, and this leader nationalized the oil, okay, for the Iranian people to get the profits from the oil. Okay, and Esau like nigga, we finna take that back. Okay, this how this nigga think, man. He plays a zero-sum game. He wants everything you got. Okay, and he wants to ration to you what he feel you should have, man. Okay, this is how these devils play the game. Okay, so let's play this.
Operation Buccaneer was shelved. So instead of an invasion, Britain launched an economic war. If they couldn't take the oil by force, they would make sure that no one else could have it. They organized a total blockade of Iranian oil. The Royal Navy patrolled the Persian Gulf. They
arranged a total blockade of Iranian oil. Did that sound familiar? They arranged a total blockade of Iranian oil. Because they wasn't able to, all right, militarily take over, okay, the oil. They put a blockade. Does this sound familiar? Okay, let's listen to it again, man. All right. I say history teach you a lot of patterns about what we see now. They paint a picture of the now. Okay, because these devils been doing the same thing, for centuries, man. When you study these old wars, man, you see the same patterns, man, going all the way back to Napoleon. Okay, you see the same patterns with these devils, man. So let's play that.
And most importantly, the United States wouldn't support it. President Harry Truman was bogged down in the Korean War. He didn't want another conflict in the Middle East. He warned the British that if they invaded Iran, he would not back them up. Without American money, Britain couldn't fight. The gunboats stayed in the harbor. Operation Buccaneer was shelved. So instead of an invasion, Britain launched an economic war. If they couldn't take the oil by force, they would make sure that no one else could have it. They organized a total blockade of Iranian oil. The Royal Navy patrolled the Persian Gulf. They announced that any tanker trying to buy Iranian oil would be treated as a buyer of stolen property. They threatened legal action against any company in the world that dared to touch Iranian crude. They froze Iranian assets in British banks. They stopped exporting steel and sugar to Iran. The British engineers and managers at Abadan were ordered to leave. In a scene of immense national drama, the British staff boarded the cruiser HMS Mauritius and sailed away. The refinery, the largest in the world, fell silent. The pipes dried up. The storage tanks were full, but the tap was closed. Britain was trying to strangle Iran into submission. They believed that without oil revenue, the Iranian economy would collapse, the people would starve, and they would overthrow Mossadegh and beg the British to return. But Mossadegh refused to break. He told his people that they would rather be poor and free than rich and enslaved. He called it an economy without oil. He issued bonds. He asked the people to endure hardship for the sake of sovereignty. And the Iranian people responded. They rallied around him. He became a hero, not just in Iran, but across the developing world. He was the man who had stood up to the British Empire. In October 1951, Winston Churchill returned to power as Prime Minister. Churchill was 77 years old. He was a man of the 19th century living in the nuclear age. He was the man who had personally converted the Royal Navy from coal to oil back in 1913. He viewed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company not just as a business, but as his child. He saw the loss of Abadan not as a financial dispute, but as a personal insult. Churchill wanted blood. He hated the idea of being bullied by a man in pajamas. He ranted to his cabinet about the need to show strength. He wanted to dust off the invasion plans. He wanted to send the paratroopers. But the economic reality had not changed. The British economy was still on life support. The gold reserves were dwindling. The Americans were still saying no to war. Churchill, the great warrior, realized with a bitter taste in his mouth that he was the leader of a second-rate power. He could not order the fleet to sail because he couldn't pay for the fuel. Churchill realized he needed a different kind of weapon. If he couldn't use the army, he had to use the shadows. He had to use spies. The British intelligence service MI6 began to plot a coup. They had a network of agents in Iran inside the military, the press, and the bazaars. They codenamed the operation Operation Boot. The plan was to use bribery and propaganda to create chaos in Tehran, to turn the people against Mossadegh, and to install a pro-British general in.
Now listen to this. How familiar does this sound? Okay, because he couldn't, wage a military campaign because British didn't have, the finances at the time. Okay, so he couldn't wage a direct military campaign. So he said, we're going to operate in the shadows. Okay, they do a coup, pay people off to cause uprising. Okay, did this sound familiar? Okay, this year, the riots in Iran this year in January, did this sound familiar? Look at how these devils operate, man. Be the same play, And this, I look at a lot of this, the Spirit be having me look at these things, man. These devils be doing the same play. Okay? So just keep listening to this and see how familiar this sound, man. And these devils do the same thing, same playbook, different country, man. Different time. All right?
This place. But there was a snag. In 1952, Mossadegh discovered the plot. He realized the British embassy in Tehran was a nest of spies. In a bold move, he expelled all British diplomats from Iran. He kicked them out. MI6 lost its eyes and ears on the ground. Their network was headless. They couldn't run a coup from London. They needed someone inside Tehran to hand out the cash and give the orders. Churchill knew there was only one way to get back into Iran. He needed the Americans. He needed the CIA. But President Truman was still in the White House, and Truman had no interest in overthrowing a democratically elected leader just to save a British oil monopoly. Truman saw Mossadegh as a nationalist, not a communist. He sympathized with the Iranians' desire to control their own resources. As long as Truman was president, the British were stuck. But time was on Churchill's side. In November 1952, the United States elected a new president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And more importantly, Eisenhower appointed two brothers to the key positions of power. John Foster Dulles became Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles became the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Dulles brothers were cold warriors. They saw the world in black and white. They saw a global chessboard where every move was a struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. Churchill saw his opening. He knew he couldn't sell a coup to the Americans based on saving the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The Americans didn't care about British profits. In fact, American oil companies were quite happy to see the British monopoly broken.
And it shows you that these devils, they run the earth, but they don't agree on everything. You know, it's tension, it's treachery, it's jealousy, it's covetousness amongst them. Okay, like they want Edomite supremacy, but then there's certain cliques that they want to be ahead of others, and you know they kind of want to see each other fail a little bit, and you know it's tacky, man. It's tacky and toxic when you get into these elites and these countries and how they deal with each other, man. It's tacky and toxic, man. You know.
So Churchill changed the narrative. He stopped talking about oil and started talking about communism. He sent his best diplomats and spies to Washington. They spun a terrifying story to the Dulles brothers. They claimed that Mossadegh was weak. They claimed that as the British blockade destroyed the Iranian economy, the country was sliding into chaos. They argued that in this chaos, the Tudeh party, the Iranian Communist Party, would seize power. They painted a nightmare scenario. Iran would fall behind the Iron Curtain. The Soviet Union would gain control of the Persian Gulf. They would control the warm water ports they had sought for centuries. They would control the oil supply of the West. It's not about our money, the British lied. It's about your security. If you don't act now, Tehran will be Moscow by Christmas. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. Churchill played on American paranoia. He used the fear of the Red Menace to get the Americans to do the dirty work of the British Empire. Eisenhower and the Dulles brothers bought it. They were terrified of a Soviet Iran. They agreed to a joint operation. The CIA would take the lead with MI6 providing the intelligence and the contacts. They renamed the plan. Operation Boot became Operation Ajax. The budget was set, $1 million. $1 million to overthrow a government and steal an oil industry worth billions. It was the highest return on investment in the history of espionage. The man chosen to run the operation was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. He was a romantic figure, a quintessential American spy. In the summer of 1953, he slipped into Iran across the border from Iraq. He carried a fake passport in a suitcase. Inside the suitcase was not a bomb or a radio. It was cash, stacks of Iranian rials and US dollars. The British had failed to invade with soldiers. They had failed to starve the country with sanctions. Now they were going to try the oldest trick in the book. They were going to buy a revolution. Kermit Roosevelt arrived in a Tehran that was a powder keg. The British blockade had done its work. The economy was collapsing. Inflation was rampant. The middle class was wiping out. The people who had cheered Mossadegh 2 years ago were now hungry and anxious. The unity of the nationalist movement was fraying. The stage was set. The script was written. The actors, generals, gangsters, journalists, and clerics were waiting in the wings for their payment. Churchill sat in London smoking his cigar, waiting for the telegram that would tell him the gamble had paid off. He knew that this was the last roll of the dice for British power in the Middle East. If the coup failed, the British Empire was finished in the region. If it succeeded, they might just get their oil back. But as Kermit Roosevelt opened his suitcase in a safe house in Tehran, he wasn't just unleashing a coup. He was unleashing a ghost. He was about to start a chain reaction that would destroy the democratic hopes of a nation, radicalize a generation, and eventually lead to the very Islamic revolution that the West fears today. The British wanted their dividend. They were about to purchase a 50-year nightmare. In the sweltering August of 1953, the fate of the British Empire in the Middle East rested in the hands of a single American spy sitting in a basement in Tehran. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. had arrived with a mission that was ostensibly political to stop communism, but was in reality purely financial, to recover the stolen assets of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. He had a budget of $1 million, cash, a network of paid agitators, and a plan that relied less on military strategy than on theatrical chaos. The operation codenamed Ajax was designed to look like a popular uprising. It was a fake revolution purchased by the barrel. Roosevelt began by bribing the Iranian press. He handed out thick envelopes of cash to newspaper editors and columnists. Overnight, the Tehran papers began to print vicious attacks on Prime Minister Mossadegh. They called him an atheist, a Jew, a British agent, and a communist spy all at the same time. The contradictions didn't matter. The goal was confusion. Then Roosevelt turned to the streets. He hired gang leaders from the Zurkhaneh, the traditional Persian houses of strength. These were muscle men, weightlifters, and wrestlers who commanded local respect and fear. For a few $100s, they agreed to organize mobs. Roosevelt hired one mob to shout, "Long live Mossadegh," and smash shop windows and beat up pedestrians. Then he hired another mob to attack the first mob, shouting, "Long live the Shah." The idea was to create a sense of total anarchy, to make the ordinary citizens of Tehran terrified of Mossadegh's rule. The British agents, who were still communicating with Roosevelt from the shadows, provided the intelligence on which generals could be bought and which clerics could be persuaded to preach against the government. But the coup had a mechanical trigger. It required the Shah of Iran, the young and indecisive monarch, to sign 2 royal decrees. One decree dismissed Mossadegh as prime minister. The other appointed General Fazlollah Zahedi, a Nazi sympathizer and British asset, in his place. The Shah was terrified. He knew Mossadegh was popular. He knew that if the coup failed, he would lose his throne. He hesitated. He packed his bags, ready to flee at a moment's notice. To stiffen his spine, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, played a crucial role. It was the voice of London, and in 1953, it was weaponized. The Shah had agreed to sign the decrees only if he received a specific signal confirming that the British government was behind the plan. The signal was to be broadcast on the BBC Persian service. Usually at midnight, the announcer would say, "It is now midnight." On the night of the coup, the announcer was instructed to say, "It is now exactly midnight." The Shah heard the
And this show you how they talk to each other through, these commercials. All right, through these certain press conferences, there's certain things that are being said. Okay, it's in code. How they talk to one another. Like they had this whole Pizzagate thing with the, the PDF files and, but there's certain press conference, the president, that's why you like, what is this nigga talking about? A lot of times these niggas be talking to each other about, what move to make next and we ready for this phase. And, because he just changed one word of his radio announcement and they gave the Shah, all right, the signal, to sign those decrees, to portray, okay, his nation, man. Okay. And this Shah figure, because when you go into this guy, all right, it's going to go into him. Okay. And then we'll discuss it at the end about his son, because America tried to pull the same thing and they pulled this nigga's son out, this year. Okay. These niggas do the same thing, But yeah, just very, very insightful, watching this and just seeing things today and then watching this is like, oh.
Extra word. He signed the decrees. On the night of August 15th, the coup began. An officer loyal to the Shah, the colonel of the Imperial Guard, drove to Mossadegh's house to arrest him. But Mossadegh had been tipped off. The Tudeh party network had infiltrated the military, and they knew the coup was coming. When the colonel arrived, he didn't find a sleeping prime minister. He found himself surrounded by loyal pro-Mossadegh troops and tanks. The arrest failed. The colonel was captured. The coup had collapsed before it even started. Panic swept through the conspirators. The Shah, hearing the news, fled the country instantly. He flew his private plane first to Baghdad and then to Rome, where he sat in a hotel lobby depressed and convinced he would never see Iran again. In Washington, the CIA was horrified. They sent a telegram to Kermit Roosevelt ordering him to evacuate immediately. Operation failed, the message read. Get out while you can. But Roosevelt ignored the order. He was a gambler. He realized that while the military part of the coup had failed, the psychological part was still in play. He decided to double down. He decided to run the coup again, but this time he wouldn't use the army. He would use the mob. For the next 3 days, Roosevelt flooded Tehran with cash. He emptied his safe. He paid anyone who could hold a stick or a rock. He organized massive demonstrations. He paid fake communists to attack mosques, knowing this would enrage the religious population. He paid clerics to declare a holy war against the government. On August 19th, the second wave hit. It was a tsunami of paid violence. Thousands of protesters marched on the government buildings. They burned the offices of the newspapers that supported Mossadegh. They attacked the police stations. Crucially, the army units that had remained neutral began to switch sides. They saw the momentum shifting. General Zahedi, who had been hiding in a CIA safe house, emerged riding atop a tank. The final battle took place at 109 Cox Street, the home of Prime Minister Mossadegh. It was a brutal, intimate siege. Pro-Shah tanks blasted the gates of the house. Mossadegh's loyal guards fought back with machine guns and bazookas. For hours, the street was a war zone. Hundreds were killed. The house was pounded into rubble. Finally, with his ammunition gone and his roof collapsing, Mossadegh surrendered. He walked out of the ruins of his home, an old man in pajamas who had dared to tell the British Empire that Iran was not a gas station. He was arrested. The radio station was seized. The announcer declared, "The government of Mossadegh has been crushed. Long live the Shah." In Rome, the Shah was eating lunch when he heard the news. He turned pale. "I knew they loved me," he reportedly said. He flew back to Tehran in triumph, greeted by the very generals who had sold out his country. In London, Winston Churchill was ecstatic. He lit a fresh cigar. The gamble had paid off. The thief had been caught. The oil was safe. The British Empire had proven it could still topple governments and dictate terms to the Third World. But when the dust settled and the bankers arrived to divide the spoils, the British received a nasty shock. They had launched the coup to save the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. They wanted their monopoly back. They wanted to return to the days when they owned 100% of Iranian oil. But the Americans, who had done the heavy lifting, who had paid the bribes and organized the mobs, had a different idea. The United States government told Churchill bluntly that the old monopoly was dead. The days of exclusive British colonialism were over. If the Iranian oil industry was going to be restarted, it had to be an international consortium. The deal that was signed in 1954 was a humiliation for Britain, masked as a victory. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was renamed British Petroleum BP, but it was forced to give up 40% of its stake to a group of American oil giants, including Standard Oil and Texaco.
And Standard Oil is the Rockefellers. Okay, so pretty much, all right, America and British hit a lick together, okay, on this Iranian oil. But America like, well, nigga, we sponsored it, we financed, and we did the heavy lifting, nigga, so we gonna take 40%. All right, and we're gonna put it on the international market, which means that they will have to sell that Iranian oil, okay, in dollars. Okay, so this what I'm saying. This how these devils do, man. Okay, they hit licks together, but then they double cross and triple cross each other, man. So you think the New World Order just some squeaky clean, plan of integrity, they're gonna do right by it? No, nigga, you finna fall out. Cause the stakes is way higher with this one. Okay? These niggas finna fall out by this New World Order, man. They do it every time. This how these niggas operate, man. Okay. And America was a superpower, was a superpower at this time, was becoming that superpower. Okay, British couldn't do nothing with them, so they just had to take it. Okay, and I said the Standard Oil, that was Rockefeller, man. Okay, got 40% out of it. All right, because the American military is nothing but, all right, the mercenaries of the elite bankers, man. Okay, the Rockefeller, like, nigga, you borrow my mercenary, the army, you borrow my mercenaries. Okay, nigga, you gotta come on in. You see.
Another 14% went to the Dutch and the French. Britain retained only 40% of the asset it had once owned completely. Churchill had won the battle for Tehran, but he had lost the war for dominance. He had invited the American fox into the British henhouse. The coup marked the definitive end of British supremacy in the Middle East and the beginning of the American era. The United States was no longer just a spectator in the region. It was now the landlord. The financial cost of the operation was $1 million. It was arguably the most efficient investment in the history of covert action. For $1 million, the West secured 25 years of cheap oil. The profits flowed again. The British treasury was replenished. The dividends were paid. The crisis was over. But the real bill for the coup would not come due for another 25 years, and it would not be paid in money. By overthrowing a democratic, secular, nationalist leader, the British and Americans destroyed the political center of Iran. Mossadegh was not a communist. He was a liberal who wanted a constitution. By crushing him, the West sent a clear message to the Iranian people: democratic change is impossible. If you want to change your country, you cannot use the ballot box because the CIA will just overturn it. This left only one avenue for opposition: the mosque. The Shah, restored to his throne, became a dictator. He was paranoid, knowing that he owed his crown to foreigners, not his own people. He created a secret police force known as Savak, trained by the CIA and the Israeli Mossad. Savak became notorious for its brutality. They hunted down communists, liberals, and anyone who whispered a word against the king. For 2 decades, the Shah ruled with an iron fist, fueled by the oil wealth that flowed from the new consortium. He modernized Iran, building highways and universities, but the wealth stayed at the top. The corruption was grotesque. The resentment grew. And in the mosques, the clerics began to tell a story. They told the story of 1953. They told the story of how the great Satan, America, and the old fox, Britain, had stolen the country as dignity. They turned Mossadegh into a martyr, not of liberalism, but of resistance. The leader of this religious opposition was an exile named Ayatollah Khomeini. In 1979, the bill finally arrived. The Iranian Revolution swept the Shah from power. It was a revolution fueled by the delayed rage of 1953, when the students...
And this is where you get the birth of Ayatollah. All right, now this guy, Ayatollah, he was the first one. Now the one that came after him, he was the one that they recently killed in those airstrikes. So you had this guy. All right, let's see, can we go back to him? Yeah. So you had this guy here. All right. This was the first Ayatollah. All right. But then you had one to come after him. He was the one, all right, that was the supreme leader, okay, all the way into this year, the one that they killed this year in February. And now, okay, it's his son, Maj Taba, that's the supreme leader now. But this birthed the Ayatollah, what the Americans and what, all right, the British did, okay, in the 50s. Okay. So this is not just no random thing that just happened, they decide to wake up and call each other like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna play it like this. Now this is an ongoing thing. Okay, so it's not just no random event. Okay, that they flip the coin and say, okay, we're gonna do this. No, this is an ongoing thing. This is a lot of tension, a lot of bad blood. People actually suffering. You have to remember the West has legit enemies, man. Okay, when you go, all right, the further you go east, the further America, the higher American hatred is, man. Okay. So let's go here.
53. They told the story of how the great Satan, America, and the old fox, Britain, had stolen the country's dignity. They turned Mossadegh into a martyr, not of liberalism, but of resistance. The leader of this religious opposition was an exile named Ayatollah Khomeini. In 1979, the bill finally arrived. The Iranian Revolution swept the Shah from power. It was a revolution fueled by the delayed rage of 1953, when the students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American diplomats hostage. They weren't just angry about the Shah's cancer treatment. They were angry about Kermit Roosevelt. They were angry about the coup. They were refighting the battle of 1953, but this time they won. The loss of Iran in 1979 was a geopolitical catastrophe for the West. It created an enemy regime that haunts the region to this day. It led to the Iran-Iraq War, the rise of Hezbollah, and the nuclear standoff we face now. All of this can be traced back to the decision made in London in 1951 to prioritize the balance sheet of an oil company over the sovereignty of a nation. Winston Churchill believed he was saving the British economy. In the short term, he did. The oil money kept the welfare state afloat for another decade. It allowed Britain to pretend it was a superpower for a little while longer. But the price was the moral standing of the West. The coup proved that for all the talk of democracy and freedom when money was on the line, the British Empire was nothing more than a debt collection agency with a spy network. The oil heist was the last gasp of the old imperial way of doing business. It was a tactical success and a strategic disaster. It taught the world that resources are a curse, and that the hand that feeds you today might strangle you tomorrow if the profit margin drops. Britain lost its oil monopoly in 1954. It lost its influence in 1979, but it lost its honor in that basement in Tehran in 1953. The millions of pounds earned by BP in the intervening years were spent long ago, but the hatred sown in those hot August days is still yielding a bitter harvest. This concludes the story of how Britain lost Iran. It is a story of how a desperate bankrupt empire tried to steal a future it could not afford and ended up paying a price that the whole world is still settling today. I'm John, and this is the Cinematic History Tales channel.
Yeah, man. So it was a lot of insight, and it shows how we got to this point, and it shows the tactics of the devil, the same things that we've been seeing, play out today, from the riots to the blockades, okay, to how these devils do with the oil, okay, how they just take full control of a nation's resources, okay, and they profit, okay, and they give these nations a cut, okay, of their own resources, a little small cut of their own resources, man. Okay, so let's go from there. Let's get this real quick. Let's go here. All right. Let's get this in the book of Psalms. Okay. Because we're in the time of the devil, being judged. Okay. And we see them running, the same plays, New Day, same play. All right. America trying to go in and do a coup and, remove, all right, the leadership and put up a puppet. Because they had brought his son, the Shah, that we seen in that video. They tried to, stage his son, and put him in power. That was one of the plans that they had. Okay. They had certain people that had sold out from amongst the ranks of Iran that they wanted, to put in power, you know, so they will be able to what, man? You know, have control of the Strait and also have control of Iranian oil. Okay. So these devils, man, we see, you know, they do these things. And then you got to play with the global reset. This one. See, at this time, it wasn't time for a global reset. So you got to factor in, you know, the global reset into this one, but also, you know, the actual, you know, tension that these nations have one amongst another. And Iran being a heavy, okay, nation as far as prophecy, man. Okay, that wild boy. The scriptures say Iran was going to be hard to deal with, and we see they hard to deal with. Okay, like I said, they was still able to choke out the economy and cause a reset. You know, which there's many ways they could have did that. All right, well they're running with this narrative of the Strait, and they're able to shut off food, and they're able to, you know, cause an energy crisis. Okay, push this narrative for energy crisis, you know, to attempt a new world order in the midst of all this, man. But at the end of the day, they're gonna lose. You know, all these plans they got, they're gonna lose. Okay, now you go here to Psalm 73 and 5. All right, it says they are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. And this is speaking of, all right, these elites, man. Okay, you know, because they don't have to deal, you know, they exist outside, okay, the realities of the rest of the world, okay, because they control, you know, they've been given so much control and so much wealth. Okay, so therefore pride compares to them about as a chain, violent covered them as a garment. Yep. You know, so they're full of pride, you know, they feel like everything belongs to them. You know, they should have, you know, they should own everything and ration out. And that's the thing with the technocracy. It's a rationing system, man, where they own all the resources and ration it, all right, to the masses, man. You know, and they've been doing this country by country. Okay. But as they try to revisit Iran, okay, hey, they hit a stumbling block. Now I say they still able to stumble into this new world order. Okay. But see, prophecy is in effect. You see, but violence, they're all about violence, man. They feel that they can just go to war and just take and take and take. Okay, and they've been able to prosper in every war. Okay, but see, in this war, this is going to backfire against them, and they're going to end up in captivity, and their kingdom is going to be destroyed. Their infrastructure is going to be destroyed, man. It says their eyes stand out with fatness. They have more than heart could wish. Yeah, he don't know how to sit his ass down, man. They have more than heart can wish, man. Nigga won't stop. It said they are corrupt and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongues, okay, walking throughout the earth. Okay? So they speak wickedly concerning oppression, mainly the oppression of Jacob. Okay? You know, they speak as if, you know, they do people a favor by conquering them. And like I said, they build a school, all right, a playground, a park, you know, and say, nigga, we love everybody. Okay? We hate, you know, we had to kill and grape and, you know, destroy the environment. But look, y'all got a park, y'all got a cell phone, y'all got an Adidas store. Okay? So it was good we did what we had to do. You know, we hate we had to do it, but it's good. That's how these devils speak about, okay, how they run the earth, their method of running the earth, man. They speak lawfully, man. Like, look, we the best thing happening to y'all. Okay, y'all didn't have this till we came. Now y'all, you know, that's how these devils speak. You see, and they set their mouth against the heavens, even to blaspheme the Most High. Okay, and their tongue, their influence, okay, walking throughout the earth, man. Okay, so this devil in his mind, all right, he's going to, you know, continue to be able, all right, to just take, okay, by any means, you know, even if he can't get it one way, he'll reset and try it again. Like right now, you know, we at this ceasefire, he's just trying to reset and go at it again. Okay, because there's a lot of games within games being played when you go into this. You know, it's never like with the elites, it's nothing black and white. All right, because they operate in gray areas and treachery. Whenever you got treachery, man, it's a lot of games within games being played. You know, and we don't get too. You know, I'll make sure I try not to get too carried away in things that don't matter. Okay, and just stick close to prophecy, man. Okay. Well, we know one thing, man, this devil is going to fail. Okay, whatever he got going on. It says, until I went into the sanctuary of the Most High, then understood I their end. All right, jumping down 17 to 18. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places. Thou castest them down into destruction. How are they brought into desolation? And in the moment they are utterly consumed with terrors. Okay, so the Lord set these devils up for failure, man. Okay, everything that they've done to this point was a setup for them to fall. All right, to have a hard fall, man. Okay, so all this wickedness and schemes and plotting and treachery that these devils got going on, and paying this off and paying them off, and got this government doing this and this army doing this and this militia and all, nigga, you gonna fail. Okay, nigga, you finna lose. Okay, when you get through doing all this goddamn running around and scrambling, nigga, you finna lose. Okay. Verse 20 said, as a dream when one awaketh, O Lord, when thou awakest, and see, prophecy has awakened on this devil, man. Okay. Prophecy has awakened on this nigga, man. You see, it said, thou shalt despise their image. Okay. And what this devil is trying to, push, man. Okay. So he's trying to push his digital image throughout the earth, man. You know, he wants to push, you know, the image of the beast as the standard of the whole entire earth, man. And if you're not down with it, all right, hey, you got to leave earth. That's what he's trying to bring, man. Okay, but the Lord despising everything that this nigga has set up, man. And the Lord is finna judge, man. You know, so I just leave it there. You know, just want to go into that history. You know, I thought that was interesting. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters, edified to the next time. You know, say Shalom. I want to give all praise and the glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba'ashem, B'Kapadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessed salutations to the whole elect. Shalom.